All right. So today we are talking about beyond prompts, how to build reliable AI workflows in production. I'm Aaron Aguillard. I'm head of growth here at Meibel. I have the pleasure of sitting with engineering teams on almost a daily basis and talking about the business critical systems that they're building with AI and unpacking what's working, what's not. That's what we're going to dig in here to today. Joining me is Meibel CEO and co-founder Kevin McGrath. Kevin was previously CTO at Spot by NetApp and an infrastructure engineer by training. Kevin started his career racking and stacking servers, and he's hands-on in many of the AI deployments that we run. Kevin, glad to have you here.
Glad to be here.
All right. So a quick context about Meibel. We're an AI orchestration platform. We handle data and how it's prepared and structured before it reaches the AI model, how workflows are orchestrated across each step, and how outputs are scored for confidence before they ship. That's a bit about the platform. Today is not a product walkthrough. We built this webinar around the problems that engineering teams actually experience as they start to build and scale AI and the disciplines that we use to solve some of those problems. The goal is for you to walk away with things that you can apply to your own systems. And for anyone who wants to take it a step further, stick around at the end. We put together a special offer, something for you to walk away with as well. So with that, let's sort of dive into things. At Meibel, we like to talk about reliable AI implementation requiring three disciplines. Kevin and I will go into what separates AI that works from AI that your business can actually rely on at scale. Specifically, we'll talk about context, control, and confidence. Kevin and I will cover questions that we hear from engineering leaders in our conversations all the time, but we also want to hear from you. So drop your questions into the chat. You can, as soon as you have them, just drop them in there. We'll try to weave them into the conversation if possible, and we'll definitely address them at the end when there's a dedicated Q&A. You'll also leave here with a self-assessment that you can run with your team. So look out for that as we wrap up. So in a lot of our conversations, what we often hear are that teams have identified AI as the right technology to solve a real problem or a specific, to integrate into a new workflow. And oftentimes they come to us and they've, built a solution that can do a thing, right? It's not that they're starting from scratch, but as they start to scale it, a lot of times they find that teams are spending way too much time maintaining context pipelines, dealing with the nuts and bolts of infrastructure instead of building the actual product. And added to that, traceability is a big issue. Being able to understand why the model gave a specific answer, where did that information come from, how do we measure output quality, and how do we even build the tools to do that well at scale? Those questions often come up in our conversations. So with that sort of pretext, Kevin, what are the top impediments that teams are seeing when they start to scale AI?
Sure. And I'll back up just a little bit. So, why are we implementing AI, right? Like there's a few different reasons organizations are implementing AI today or even humans, right? And at most organizations, there's a throughput problem, right? That's what technology has been solving, a throughput problem, since, forever. How do we do things faster? How do we do things better? How can we accomplish more as a human or more as a business than we did before? And there's kind of two big buckets as I see. There's many buckets, but two big buckets are AI that, there's a chat prompt that sits next to a human and it's helping that human be better at their job every day. And the human can prompt and they're looking at the outputs and they're making that AI work for them. And then I see another bucket of AI where you're embedding that into a workflow, a process, a scalable solution behind the scenes. It's another form of automation within your organization. When we talk about what we see as barriers or hurdles with AI, we're going to focus on that second bucket. That's where we focus on at Maybell. Our customers might turn that into a product that also sits next to a human in their organization, but where we see most companies is they are trying to use AI to do a next level of automation in their organization. And then more specifically, where we see a lot of customers are across manufacturing, logistics, chemical engineering, construction, these organizations that use unstructured or need unstructured information being passed around their entire industry on a daily basis. And so there's this great use of AI where you're combining this large amounts of unstructured data that's being passed around with the structured way that you want to run your business. And marrying those two things together is actually a very difficult task. And there is no AI easy button that necessarily does that for your business. And especially when you're talking about these industries that process massive amounts of unstructured information. And by unstructured, I'll mean everything from PDF files to Word documents to Excel files to, people in the construction space literally taking pictures of a bill of materials or something with their phone out in the field and sending it in. How do you process that? How do you understand that? How are you responding to everything from requests for proposals to allowing your customers to get accurate product information that may not actually be stored in a centralized database somewhere? And what we find during this process is AI is really compelling. So you take this current information you have in your organization and you throw it to an LLM, and the answer is pretty good. And you look at it and you're like, wow, it got really close. But close isn't necessarily good enough when you want to start, putting the revenue of your company behind running on top of that AI solution, right? Like close isn't good where if you have a particular, product line that, you can't have misinformation going back out to the customers, or the way you're doing analytics across things, you can't have a human eyeball looking at, tens of thousands of documents coming through every day. So how do you look at that? And more context equals more problems. So larger context windows are great. You can feed a lot more to the LLM. You can pay them a lot more in token fees, but it doesn't necessarily make the answer better. So how you look at all of this data that's coming into your system and how you pre-process it before it gets to an LLM is extremely important. And processing that information is hard. There is no one way to do it. Like just going out and saying, okay, I'm going to get a vector database. Well, it's not actually a vector database. I'm going to do a graph database. I'm going to do GraphRag, or I'm going to do some other technology. Different modalities of data should be stored in different ways. So at the retrieval process, you're doing multi-level retrieval process to understand what is the question being asked. How do I retrieve the data in a consistent way to get it to the LLM to then get consistent answers over maybe a variable set of inputs? And within that, leaning on AI can be a little too much. So especially in the world of agentic, we went from just using AI, from AI being this thing, to everybody wanting to go full-blown agentic in no time at all. And AI is really, really good, really, really powerful. But I think where it falls down from some people is when they over-index on AI. And I think doing these really creative agentic things are awesome to test. When you get to high scale production, you actually want to go as narrow and deep as possible for a specific AI task to handle. And leaning on AI to do too much, like if you have AI at the top and then AI is making all the decisions all the way down to the bottom, that's going to instill more uncertainty throughout your entire system than maybe putting a more structured workflow around specific AI components. And then on top of that, measurement. So you've done all these things. You figured out AI is good for your data. You understand that you need to prepare it. You understand that, hey, I want to narrow the scope and go deep on what certain AI agents or components can do in my system. But how do you measure it, right? A lot of people are eyeballing today. There needs to be a measurement system of some sort. And depending on whether you have a data science team within your organization or not, there's a level of difficulty there. And then, as I said before, that consistency at scale. One of these is usually where we're meeting a customer that's teetering on the point of, I've implemented something. I know AI is kind of the right answer for what we want to get done, but I don't know how to ensure the rest of my business or the rest of my team, what's the consistency that we can run with this in production, and is it going to wake us up at night, or is it going to cost the company a ton of money down the road because it's just too variable in what it does.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Kevin, a lot of the teams that we speak to, you alluded to this just now as well. They already have something in production that they've been working on. What are some of the traps that those teams potentially can fall into when it comes to building AI for scale? Why do you think that there is often a trend where we see teams starting off with a lot of momentum, and then all of a sudden around the midpoint things start to get more difficult than expected?
I mean, it really harkens back to the scale problem. So when you're with smaller data sets, smaller testing environments, the smaller context you're giving to the LLM at any given time is super important. So as that data set starts to grow, I think it becomes even more and more important to pre-process your data before it gets to an LLM. So when you're asking an LLM to do something, there are time constraints, token constraints. There's all kinds of constraints that go around that. So if you're trying to do these one-shot asks to an LLM, as your data or production set gets larger and larger, you can't do that. So like I said before, so you start building different processes to understand what that data is that you're giving to the LLM. And then for measurability, you want to have systems, you want to understand what that context is. It's not enough to like give a context and see an answer. You want to understand and compare the context that you gave to the LM. You want to compare that to the answer, right? Was the data given into it the data that's coming out, right? How do I understand if an LLM is giving me pre-trained data instead of data that I asked it to give me out of the data that I gave it? There are ways to track the sparse and dense vectors and different things throughout the system to understand that. And where we see people go from, hey, this is compelling and I've set up a chain that I think works, to production, is really that handoff moment. Whereas, can this thing run without me? And how does this thing run without me? And how do I QA this as it's running at scale? How do I look at the 5% of the information I need to look at and not every single output that comes through the system? And that's tough. Building that pipeline is not straightforward. There's a ton of different technologies out there that you can pull off the shelf, pull a stack together and build it on your own. And supporting that stack, I think there's a big difference from making the thing that works initially and then understanding how to support, maintain, and run it going forward. So I think that's the biggest thing, is when it comes down to making better and better AI, it comes down to really, really honing in on, do I have the right context? Did I control what the AI or the LLM is seeing at any given time? And can I measure my next output against my last output?
Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about how we do that. What should teams actually be spending their time on when they're trying to manage through these things?
Right. So I've already talked a lot about context. So with context, it is that pre-process your information. If you're working with large data sets, you need to pre-process your information in some way, shape, or form. Particularly at Meibel, we go through great lengths to understand multimodal data, understand structured versus unstructured information, understand documents that have structured buried in it. So for instance, if you're in the construction space, you're going to have, very large PDF files for either requests for proposals or product definitions. In the finance space, you're going to have deep financial tables. In insurance, you're also going to have maybe, combination of handwritten notes or handwritten information along with insurance information, along with all kinds of modality. They can come in PDF files, Word documents, Again, Excel's, maybe it's a Google Doc, right? You have to understand what you're looking at. And it's not good enough just to take the text out of that document and give it to an LLM. It's not. You will get compelling results, but you won't get deep, accurate, repeatable results at scale unless you're understanding how to hand that information off. Also, a lot of AI solutions that we work with aren't about just parsing one document. It's about looking across tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of documents for a particular AI interface, and then using that to then get an output. And again, you don't want to pass all that context in. So having a ingest process that understands how to prepare data and not just in one way, right? You need to store this data in different ways. If it's relational, store it as relational. If it's semantic, vectorize it. If it's related to each other, maybe use a graph database, maybe use a relational database. Use a multitude of tools. There is no one tool that's going to be magic for it to work. Um, you got to be able to build confidence in throughout the system. So something we do at Maibel is all the way down through the OCR process. We're scoring. We're scoring uncertainty. If you're converting an image to text, there's a certain level of uncertainty that happens when converting an image to text. What is that level of uncertainty? This compounds along the way. You need to understand what that level of uncertainty is. You need to understand how that level of uncertainty ultimately affects the level of uncertainty for your final answer. And then if you're stringing together agents and doing other things, it gets much more complex. And control. One of the best examples that I've heard in the industry of, how an LLM works is the movie Memento. And if you haven't seen the movie Memento, a guy wakes up every morning and puts a story together by all the tattoos he has on his body. And if he looks in the mirror and he pieces the story together because he has no short-term memory. An LLM is kind of the same. If you don't present the LLM with context, it doesn't necessarily give it back. If you present it too much context, really bad things can happen, which if you see the movie, presenting too much context to the mirror actually ends up in a very different outcome than you would expect. So it's very similar to that. So you need a way to control the information, control your data. You need a way to measure, and really, really, really need a way to prepare and understand how to present and retrieve your data when used at scale.
Great movie, by the way. If you haven't seen it, go check out Memento. So just a quick point of order here. We're going to be sharing slides off and on throughout, and we will also address any questions that come up in the chat. So if anything we're saying brings a question to mind, or if there are specific questions or challenges that you're working through right now in your own book of business, just put that in the chat. We'd love to incorporate those into the conversation. So we were talking about some of the challenges of structured and unstructured documents earlier. Let's double click on that. And how do you see some of the challenges of dealing specifically with unstructured documents sort of rear up in a lot of the builds that we come across?
I think it's the structured and references that exist in unstructured documentation. Processing a single file is obviously a lot easier than processing a ton of files, or maybe a file that's thousands of pages long, or a whole document manual. But there's implicit structure in unstructured information. Understanding that structure before it gets to an LLM is going to help you in a variety of different ways. Can the LLM figure it out at runtime? Maybe. Is it going to figure it out the same way at runtime every time? Maybe not. Depends on how large the context that you're sending in. If you pre-process and understand a few different things, one, you got to understand the document, understand reading order, headings, images, flow, understand implicit and explicit references. So for instance, in legal documentation, it might say do this if this, but not this. If you understand those relationships before presenting to an LLM, you will get much stronger results than if you try to prompt your way to that goal. So one of the first things that we see people trying to do is a longer prompt, or I'm going to write a better prompt, or I'm going to prompt engineer my way out of this. And at least to this date, you can't like you'll get better until the point that you start getting worse. And I think everybody's seen this. If I mean, even if you use OpenClaw or anything else, like as soon as you start getting to more and more detail and you start getting to those context windows maximums, or even with memory and you start condensing the memory down to get to the next part, AI doesn't necessarily work as well. So how do you set up a retrieval process that's going to get very similar retrieval, accurate retrieval based on the question to the LLM, and what's your workflow and process to make that happen? I think the big takeaway is you're not just engineering to get the data to the LLM and prompt your way out of it. There is a systematic way that you want to look at the data, prepare the data, send the data in, and then make that as pinpointed of a solution as possible before you do the next step and the next step and the next step.
Absolutely. Kevin, a lot of people are talking about agentic right now. We're all building agentic AI. What are some of the production realities around actually building confidence into that process?
Yeah, so when you're talking about agentic, you're talking about, pure agentic's been kind of used in a variety of different ways, right? But when we talk about agentic, we think about AI making decisions for other AI to do, right? Kind of the pure form. Some people use agentic as just AI. But when you have AI making decisions for other AI things to do, and then those AI things having decisions for other AI things to do, you kind of run into this old paradigm. How I refer to, and I think we have a slide for this somewhere if we bring it up, but there's I used to rack and stack servers, right? And so we used to always think about what's our service availability, right? And this is this is my old school days of when we'd have like compute network and storage. We'll take big blocks. If they're all 4 nines, you don't have a 4 9 system anymore, right? So if you want to build a 4 9 system, the underlying components of that system can't be 4 9s. They have to be greater than 4 9s. And so I bring this example up from time to time because agents are no different, right? So we're talking about a non-deterministic outcome anytime that you're using AI. So there's a level of uncertainty that every agent is going to have. And if you have an agent making decisions for other agents, you need to understand what's my level of uncertainty of the first process leading into the second process to the third process to the fourth process. And this is why I say when you're running things at scale, it's most of the time we see that it's better that you have some sort of structured workflow that AI is fitting into and not necessarily AI running the entire workflow for you because of this phenomenon. Every time you're introducing uncertainty into the system, the uncertainty of the output is going to multiply, downward, right? Just like in the old days when we're putting together. So if we wanted to build a 4 9 system, you have to have much better than 4 9s compute network and storage to get that outcome. If you're measuring your outputs and you say, hey, my confidence score needs to be a 95 or greater, you're going to have inputs that are generally higher than 95 going into that overall output. So it's something you need to think about. We're in an undeterministic world, or we're combining two worlds. We're combining a deterministic world and a non-deterministic world together, and you need to look at those in their own way.
Right. Absolutely. So, shifting gears just a little bit here, Kevin, you said something to me that's stuck before. Don't ship AI outputs that you can't measure. We've been talking a lot about confidence and control and context control and confidence. What does it take for a team to really go out there and measure outputs properly? What type of tools do they need to use?
It's a good question. What we see mostly when customers come to us is they're using LLM judges. And LLM judges aren't bad for certain things. LLM judges are very good. In fact, LLMs can be better judges of their output than they are in creating the output in the first place, which is why one of those mechanisms with working with AI is simply asking, like, are you sure? right? When you're talking to Claude or you're talking to OpenAI. And then it will reevaluate itself. So one of the things that you can do is you can use an LLM judge. Now, an LLM judge is good, but it's not necessarily going to give you everything that you want running at scale. So what are other things that you want to look for? You want to look for answer consistency. So that's, asking the same question over and over again. Are you getting the consistency of answers that you want to get over time? There are more technical things you can do. You can use natural language process and machine learning models to actually track the sparse and dense tokens that you provided the LLM in the first place, and then comparing them with the sparse and dense tokens that you got in the output. You can look for things like readability. You can look for things like coherence, right? We have about 14 different things that users can turn on and off in the system for confidence scoring. And the answer is that every agent you build is going to have a different thing you want to build confidence on. So example, two customer examples that we have. So in the financial space and manufacturing space, they need to make sure that the data if there's a corpus of data the AI is supposed to be working on, you better be able to track back to the place it pulled the data out of and it shows up in the output. And the confidence score in that case is based on how accurate am I pulling the data from a specific place, whether it came from a PDF, a document, Excel file, wherever it came from, however it was extracted, however it was used in the answer, that is correct. And a lot of people see that as the way that you score. It's always correct. But we have another customer that does strategy planning and red teaming. And they want to make sure that the AI is actually being creative. They want to make sure that the AI is staying within a box, but not necessarily, just spitting back answers that came out of a document. They want to make sure that the answer is giving creative responses on red teaming solutions and foresight planning. So you need to be able to have a system that you can use these different mechanisms on how it pulls and how it uses information in different ways and score it for yourself. So, I mean, I wish there was one type of open source scoring system or one way to say AI is being right or being wrong. The reality is people use AI for a lot of different reasons, and you're going to have to kind of tweak that scoring system for what you're building.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We have a question here from Dave. He mentions your presentation points to issues for a few enterprise applications. What are your views on a few refined data sources being prompted by thousands of users? This is an interesting. This is an interesting question. Definitely very broad in nature. Dave, if you have a specific scenario, definitely please add some context there. But Kevin, what are your thoughts on Dave's question?
Yeah, I think this is also good. So one is, are you going to open a chatbot for someone to just ask anything in the world to it, right? Again, you don't want to just necessarily send any context along without some safeguards in place along the way. Refined data set can mean a lot of different things. When we think of data sets, we think about structured and unstructured, what we talk about table augmented generation and retrieval augmented generation. Those questions, even if it's a refined data set, if the questions are truly any question that come in, your AI is going to have to put data together in a lot of different ways. So you could use MCP, you could use tooling. How you pre-process that information is still extremely important. Are you extracting structured information out in a certain way that it can be queried very fast in memory and accurate answers can be presented to an LLM before it does a semantic analysis on top of that? Are you looking for RAG capabilities? A refined data set means, hey, I'm pretty happy with this, but that refined data set it can be multimodal. It can have a lot of different attributes to it. You can still run into many scenarios where you want to aggregate that data in different ways to answer a variety of different questions. And we absolutely have use cases like that where there's a corpus of information that's then being exposed through another product to our customers' users, where there are thousands of other users. And when they ask questions, even though it's a refined data set, there's a lot of different ways you can put that data together depending on the question that comes in. So you still want to think about how you're storing that data, how you're presenting that data to the LLM. Usually, are you getting the same question in every time? Are you opening it up to many questions? I think we could unpack that for a while. Dave, if I helped answer that question, let me know. If you wanted me to go, you know, if we can go further, maybe I can take it to the end, but allowing any question on a topic points to a culture and training challenge. Yeah, I mean, culture is a big thing in organization too. I think we get lost on that. That's a whole webinar in and of itself, the culture of your organization and AI. I think we could do a whole nother session on that. But yeah, let's keep going. And I'm more than happy to circle back to that towards the end of the webinar as well.
Okay, wonderful. Uh, let's talk about a few customer stories, and then share the self-assessment slide with the group here. So Kevin, can you tell us, a little bit about how we've seen things not only go right, but how they sort of go wrong as well? What are some of the pros and challenges that we've come across in our engagements with customers over time?
I mean, I kind of mentioned this before, but I think one of the big things is trying to use the whole context window for everything. Just sending too much context, thinking, hey, I'm not getting the answers I want, so I'm gonna send more data to the LLM. I think it sounds simple, but I think that's the biggest one that we run into. It's like, well, I'm not getting answers I want. It must need more data. And I think there's a lot of people out there saying that's what you do too. Like there's a lot of people pushing for these super large context windows. How do we just give the LLM or the AI more data, more data, more data? In a lot of cases, that's not the answer to do more data. Or if you have a chat with thousands of users behind it, it's not about having one agent behind the scenes. It's about having, I don't know, 50 very deep vertical agents and then routing it to the correct one to get you the answer. And then each of those agents has a data set that it's working off of, right? Again, to get repeatability, you want to narrow down what that agent is doing as much as possible. Trying to build one agent to rule them all, I think, might work out in the beginning when you're solving one problem, but when you're trying to solve more and more and more, baking that into a single agent hurts you. It doesn't help. And thinking about your agent being a specialist or your AI being a specialist, and then how you orchestrate that, right? What are you using? Are you using agent to agent? Are you using a workflow system? Are you using an orchestration system? And having some stability in the orchestration system, I think, is very important because it becomes very hard to debug truly agentic processes.
All right. And thank you, Emily, for calling out that there's questions in the QA dialogue. I just pulled that up, and we have some interesting ones here. I'll call out one here. It might be a bit of a curveball here for you, Kevin. Aren't we making a mistake by forcing non-deterministic fit into a system designed for deterministic results?
Not necessarily, right? We still have humans doing a lot of work. Humans are kind of non-deterministic at the end of the day, right? And I mean, it's hard to answer for all use cases in the world. If there is a specific deterministic use case and it works best as a deterministic use case, yeah, why use AI? Don't do it. We're not here to say use AI for everything in the world, right? I think AI fits in pieces. If there is a truly deterministic part of your system, it should be deterministic. Maybe you use AI to write that code now instead of writing that code on your own. But you write a test suite and you write it. So when I give it certain inputs, I'm going to get certain outputs. And this is the way that system works. There's no reason you need to change that part of your system over into AI. None whatsoever. We have orchestration systems, workflow systems. We have all kinds of things that can tie together both deterministic and non-deterministic workflows. So I would do that. Again, but just because you have the AI hammer doesn't mean that everything is a nail, right? Use it for what it's good for.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's share the self-assessment with everyone here, and then we can move into more Q&A at the end. So tell me, Kevin, how do we work with teams and coach teams to think about applying context control and confidence to their build?
Sure. So, trying not to just repeat everything that we said before, but, how do you handle unstructured, semi-structured, unstructured sources? How are you handling your context? Are you sure you understand the data that you're giving to AI? And what I mean by that is, do you understand the makeup? Do you understand the modality? You can understand more about the text and intelligence of that data itself when you start working with the outputs. But are you at least taking data, understanding it, and providing it into the LLM in a way that will use the fewest amount of tokens for the highest amount of accuracy possible? Can you control that? Can you control what the LLM sees when it sees it? Can you control what tools are being used, what tools aren't being used? How much power are you giving to your end user? How much do you want to restrict from your end user in the product that you're building? And how do you control that consistency? And then, you know, can your team tell which outputs to trust? Do you understand how the AI, not necessarily when I say how the AI got to its result, do you at least understand how your data was applied to AI to get the result? Without open weights and a whole bunch of different things, you're never really going to truly understand how the model did. Some models out there are getting better and better about exposing APIs to under the covers of how they came up with an answer. And that should be part of what you use for your overall measurement capabilities. But you're going to have to measure everything around from your context through your control system, how well you think you're doing.
Okay. All right. So that self-assessment is something that you can take a screenshot, take it home. I also wanted to mention before we jump into the QA, we're going to be in San Jose at the Generative AI Summit. So if you are in that area and if you plan to attend, definitely come visit us. If you are in the area and are not planning to attend but might like to, connect with me on LinkedIn. We might be able to help you get tickets to attend the Generative AI Summit in San Jose. That's April 14th through 15th. And we also would like to extend a special offer to everyone here. Listen, if you like what we were talking about and want to give it a try for yourself, speak with our team about how to apply some of these concepts to your build, or even give it a spin on the Meibel platform. We would love to talk to you about your use case, and if we decide to build something together, we'll even apply $1,000 credit on the Meibel platform, good for 60 days, so you can build your proof of concept and see how it works in the real world. So feel free to connect with us over here. There will also be a link in the chat for you to schedule. So click on that and schedule some time for us to talk one-on-one. Now, let me pull up the Q&A over here. We have some really interesting questions. Kevin, would you like to take a stab at? We have a few questions here.
I just figured out how to pull up the Q&A myself, so I am I'm over here now.
Yeah. I'll give you one to start with, and then you can take your pick. How do we bridge the application infra bridge early in the process while scaling / deploying an LLM in production? So that's from Sudhar. Thank you for that question.
Right. So how do we bridge the application infrastructure bridge early in the process while scaling? So yeah, this is a tough one because when you start out, it's usually you and an LLM. And as you move through this process, you're deciding all of these different technologies that you're putting between yourself and the LLM. So, not to be too self-serving, you do need to make a decision. Are you going to DIY this, or are you going to go out and get a platform like Meibel? I'm going to answer this in a way that you can do either. So as you design this, I mean, design principles haven't necessarily changed over the course of history, right? Like you want to make modular ways that you are accepting information, giving information to the LM, getting it back. And then the scaling part, what's in the middle is you are going to have to look for either tools or services in the middle to help you there. If you need a vector database, are you going to run that on your own? If you're going to come out with references and citations, are you going to use machine learning to figure out what the next step of a process should be? Are you going to build your own natural language processing models, things like that to figure things out? You need to have a system where those are going to sit, where they're going to run. You're going to have your own orchestration. I don't think to do this, at an enterprise scale, you're going to have AI just making all the decisions for you in the background. You're going to have some sort of workflow system that allows you to put more components in between you and the LLM, whether those are databases, whether those are preprocessors, whether it's an ETL. I don't know if that answers your question, but if you're early in the process, I don't think design processes has changed from, thinking about modality or thinking about not modality, but modularity, and being as service oriented and as modular as possible. I know that's kind of like a generic answer, but I don't think that answer changes for what we're building with AI from other components that we built before.
And we have another question here. How are you tracking uncertainty across pipeline steps, OCR extraction, retrieval generation? Are those independent confidence scores you're aggregating somehow, or a single end-to-end metric?
Yeah, so specifically in the Meibel platform, we go through great lengths to understand, like I'll take a PDF document, for example. Large PDF document has to come in. Not only do you need to parse that document, but you understand, are there images in there? Do you need to OCR those images? When you RCO those images, what's in that image? Does it need further processing, things like that. So our system scores all the way down to that level, to the point that when that information is retrieved, why was it retrieved? What sparse and dense vectors were used in the context? How did they show up in the output, and how they show up at the end? So everything is scored individually. And then Meibel uses LLM judges as part of the process. It is part of an evaluation at the end, but it's combined with all of these other scores. We do have a confidence score that you can tune on your own for your own particular agents. That confidence score is based on the different inputs that you want to use to produce that final score. And again, as you're building different agents, those scores will mean different things for you, right?
Yeah. All right. I see that we have some questions here that are a little bit more oriented to actually fine-tuning models. So one question I have is, how do you manage and amend weights, et cetera, to deal with deep learning and neural networks biases?
So we don't do fine tuning, or my data science team does fine tuning. We have models that run within Meibel that my data scientist would be much more better to answer than me. Unfortunately, I was technical and I pretend to be technical, but they're much better at answering this. Our customers aren't fine tuning models with us necessarily. We can run fine-tune models on Meibel. If a data science team brings a model, we're more about running that model that exists and applying the context around that and then getting you the best answer from that. Most of our customers don't need a fine-tune model. And in fact, going back to one of the previous questions, where do some customers fall down? A lot of people think they need to fine tune before fine tuning actually needs to be done. There are some very specific reasons that you do need to fine tune. If there's a lot of heavy jargon around what you do on an interface, if latency is the number one thing that you're solving for, fine tuning a much smaller model is probably needed. But we do find a lot of people who think that they need to fine tune don't need to. And fine tuning is a much bigger level of effort. I know there's a lot of tools and services out there that make even fine tuning easier, but fine tuning is another level of maintenance and support going forward. And in my Memento example before, if you're fine tuning the wrong data in, it's harder, or not harder, but you got to refine tune to make sure you get that data back out again. Whereas if you're context engineering, you can still take context engineering extremely far, and you have a lot more power over a call-to-call basis on how the data is coming in and coming out. So the answer is, in the Meibel platform itself, we'll allow people to set like chunking sizes and different things like this that apply to how you use AI against the underlying LLM or underlying model. but you're not fine-tuning the model itself in the Maybell platform. It's kind of a different level of the stack, but we do that. And if we have a follow-up, maybe we'll do a follow-up webinar with some more of our technical team on there, and they can go deep into how we think about that.
Absolutely. Or if you'd like to talk to our team directly, you just grab that link in the chat. We'd be happy to learn more about what you're working on and answer any questions on a one-to-one basis. We can bring our technical team to answer those questions as well. So let's see. We have another one from Anonymous here. When you say orchestration layer, are you talking about something like LangChain or Llama Index, or is that a bespoke workflow engine? What does that actually look like in production?
I mean, it can mean a lot. It can mean those things. Absolutely. It can be LangChain. It can be LangGraph. On a DIY perspective, it could be N8N. It can be Meibel, right? It depends on how you want to put it together. It could be Airflow. There's a lot of different ways. AI is like running AI is no different than running a lot of other systems that we've built in the past and orchestrating it together. You do want to make sure that you're analyzing those inputs and outputs a little bit differently. So what's different in the workflow is that you have non-deterministic answers coming out. So when we think about what's called old school workflows, I guess, when you think about more legacy workflows, you have very prescriptive steps and what happens along each step. And when more an agentic workflow, you're deciding the next step. But you can still use a lot of the same underlying tools to orchestrate that workflow. Some work better than others, but absolutely on a DIY aspect, a LangChain or a LangGraph, you can do that on your own. You have to build a lot of the pieces into that. If you're looking for different services out there, there's plenty of workflow services that will work as well. We see a world where agent to agent is agent to agent and A2UI are going to be two very important kind of open standards that everybody should be compatible with, including ourselves. And especially agent to agent, how do you build agents on multi-platform? So agents can talk between different platforms that you use, I think will be extremely important as well.
All right. So I think we have time for one last question, just to sort of wrap things up, and then we will call it a day. Early, you mentioned, Kevin, this is another question here in the Q&A. You mentioned that teams are spending too much time maintaining context pipelines. What does that look like in the real world? Can you clarify that part of the is it part of the agentic process, or is it part of the data pre-processing, ingestion, or both?
I think what happens is you start spending more time. You spend more time on you spend more time maintaining and building the infrastructure than you do the business outcome that you originally set forth, right? So if you tie it all the way back to the top of this, there was a throughput problem in your business that you were trying to solve. Are you spending more time trying to solve the throughput problem, or are you spending more time solving the infrastructure problem? And I think it's an eye-opening experience for people when they start implementing these AI systems, how much AI infrastructure really matters to run this stuff at scale. And I think there's a marketing problem in the world where it says just give AI anything that you need, and AI is going to magically kind of give you the answer. And the people who really get into the nuts and bolts of this thing realize that that's not the case. And when they realize that, you start getting, you start working your way down this rabbit hole of, okay, I just need this next tool and this next tool and this next tool and this next tool. And you'll find that all of a sudden you're managing this stack. And even with vibe coding and everything else that we have, maintenance, support, and SLAs are still extremely important. And as that stack gets bigger and bigger, I don't care how much AI you have, that gets harder and harder to maintain if if you haven't set everything up or intuitively know how a system works. I think, at scale, we still need to know these things.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And we hope to make this a regular series. So thank you again for taking the time to join us here. And if you found anything that you liked and would like to double click on with us directly or speak with our team, or even try building on the Meibel platform itself, please use the link in the chat to connect with us or connect on LinkedIn. And have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.